The smoke billowed from Marcus's backyard grill as Karen Henderson stormed across the pristine lawn, her face twisted with righteous fury. "You're violating HOA regulations," she shrieked, waving a stack of papers like a weapon. But when Marcus calmly reached into his jacket and pulled out a weathered document, Karen's world was about to crumble. What she saw on that property deed would destroy everything she thought she knew. The Saturday afternoon sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estates as Marcus Chen adjusted the temperature on his new gas grill. The aroma of marinated chicken and bell peppers filled the air, mixing with the distant sound of children playing in nearby yards. He'd been looking forward to this moment all week, his first real barbecue since moving into the neighborhood 3 months ago. The flames danced beneath the grill grates as Marcus flipped the chicken, humming contentedly. The stress of his recent divorce, the cross-country move, and starting over at 42 seemed to melt away with each perfect sear mark. His daughter Emma would be visiting next weekend, and he wanted everything to be perfect for her first sleepover at his new place. "Excuse me." The sharp voice cut through his peaceful reverie like a blade. Marcus looked up to see a woman marching across his backyard with the determination of a general advancing on enemy territory. She was immaculately dressed in a white tennis outfit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that seemed to stretch her features into a permanent expression of disapproval. "I'm Karen Henderson, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," she announced, stopping just short of his patio. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against a thick folder clutched to her chest. "And you're in direct violation of our community standards." Marcus blinked, tongue still in hand. "I'm sorry, what?" "The smoke," Karen said, gesturing dramatically at the thin wisps rising from his grill. "It's creating a nuisance for the entire neighborhood. We have very specific regulations about outdoor cooking activities." "It's just a barbecue," Marcus said, keeping his voice level despite the irritation building in his chest. "I'm cooking dinner in my own backyard." Karen's laugh was brittle and condescending. "Your backyard, Mr. Chen." "Marcus Chen." "Mr. Chen, clearly you didn't read your HOA agreement carefully enough. Section 12.4 specifically prohibits any outdoor cooking that produces excessive smoke or odors that might disturb other residents." She flipped open her folder and pulled out a laminated sheet. "You're also in violation of the setback requirements. Your grill needs to be at least 15 feet from any property line." Marcus glanced at his grill, then at the wooden fence that bordered his yard. "It's got to be at least 20 feet from the fence." "I measured it myself," Karen said smugly. 14 feet, 8 inches. "That's a clear violation. You measured my yard. I have every right to ensure community standards are maintained. That's what property values are built on, Mr. Chen. Standards." She pulled out another sheet of paper. "This is your formal notice of violation. You have 48 hours to remedy this situation or face a fine of $500. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd dealt with difficult people before, his ex-wife's family, demanding clients, bureaucratic nightmares during his divorce, but there was something particularly galling about Karen's tone. It wasn't just authoritative, it was dismissive. As if he were a child who tracked mud through her pristine house. "Look, Mrs. Henderson, it's Miss Henderson. And I'm not finished." Karen's voice rose a notch. "I've been monitoring your property since you moved in, and frankly, I'm concerned about the direction this neighborhood is heading. First, you didn't request approval for your landscaping changes. I planted some tomatoes. Any modifications to the approved landscape plan require HOA approval. Then there's your parking situation. You've been parking your truck in the driveway instead of the garage." Marcus stared at her. "It's my driveway. It's community property, Mr. Chen. Everything in this neighborhood is designed to maintain a certain aesthetic. Your truck is an eyesore that doesn't fit our community standards." "My truck?" A 2018 Ford F-150 with scratches on the tailgate and what appears to be construction equipment in the bed. "This is a family neighborhood, not a work site." The pieces were starting to fall into place. Marcus had noticed the looks from some neighbors. The way conversations seemed to pause when he walked by. He'd chalked it up to being the new guy, but now he was seeing something else entirely. "Let me get this straight," Marcus said, setting down his tongs. "You have a problem with my truck, my tomatoes, and my barbecue. Anything else?" Karen's smile was razor-sharp. "I'm simply ensuring that Willowbrook Estates remains the kind of community where families want to raise their children. We have standards here, Mr. Chen. If you're not prepared to maintain them, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a different type of neighborhood." The implication hung in the air like the smoke from his grill. Marcus felt a familiar weight settle in his stomach, the same feeling he'd had when his ex-wife's country club friends would ask him about his background or when colleagues would express surprise at his articulate presentations. "I see," Marcus said quietly. "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." Karen tucked her papers back into her folder. 48 hours, Mr. Chen. And I'll be checking." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and you might want to review the noise ordinance as well. We've had complaints about your music." "My music? Classical music after 9 p.m. is still noise, Mr. Chen. Some of us have early mornings." Marcus watched her walk away, her tennis shoes silent on the grass. He'd been playing Chopin at barely audible levels while working in his garage, but apparently even that was too much for Willowbrook Estates. He looked down at his chicken, now slightly charred from inattention. The peaceful afternoon had evaporated, replaced by a familiar knot of anger and frustration. This was exactly the kind of situation he'd hoped to leave behind in California. The petty power plays, the coded language, the death by 1,000 cuts. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for his real estate agent, Lisa Martinez. She'd helped him find this place, assured him it was perfect for a fresh start. Maybe she could explain the HOA rules better than Karen Henderson. "Marcus, how's the new place treating you?" Lisa's voice was warm and professional. "I'm having some issues with the HOA," Marcus said, walking toward his back door. "The president just threatened to fine me for grilling in my backyard." "Karen Henderson." Lisa's tone shifted slightly. "What's she claiming now?" "Something about smoke violations and setback requirements. She measured my yard, Lisa. She's been watching my house." There was a pause on the other end. "Marcus, I need to ask you something. Do you still have all your closing documents?" "Of course." "Why?" "Can you find the property deed?" "The actual deed, not the purchase agreement." Marcus frowned. "Sure, but why? What's this about?" "Just to find it." "I'll hold." Marcus went inside and pulled out the folder containing all his home-buying paperwork. The deed was there, thick and official-looking, with all the legal language he'd barely glanced at during closing. Property descriptions, lot numbers, easements. "Okay, I've got it," he said, returning to the phone. "Read me the property description section. The part with all the measurements and boundaries." Marcus squinted at the small print. "Let's see. Beginning at a point on the northerly side of Willowbrook Drive, thence running easterly along said drive for a distance of..." "Lisa, this is all technical stuff. What am I looking for?" "Keep reading. Look for any mention of common areas or shared facilities." Marcus continued reading, his voice trailing off as he reached a particular section. His eyes widened as he processed the words on the page. "Lisa," he said slowly. "This says something about including all common areas, recreational facilities, and community grounds as described in attached Schedule B. What's Schedule B?" "Check the back pages." Marcus flipped through the document until he found Schedule B. It was a detailed map of the neighborhood, with his property clearly marked. But there was something else, a shaded area that seemed to encompass far more than just his lot. "Lisa, I think there's been some kind of mistake. This map shows my property extending way beyond my backyard. It includes the community park, the tennis courts, even the HOA building." "No mistake, Marcus. Read the ownership clause at the bottom of Schedule B. Marcus found the clause and read it aloud. Said property includes full ownership of all common areas, recreational facilities, and community infrastructure, grantor retaining lifetime management rights. Lisa, what does this mean? It means, Marcus, that you don't just own a house in Willowbrook Estates. You own Willowbrook Estates. The whole thing. The previous owner was Harold Willowbrook himself, the original developer. When he died, his estate sold everything to you. Karen Henderson has been running an HOA for a community that you actually own. Marcus felt the phone slip in his hand. Through his kitchen window, he could see Karen Henderson in her own backyard, probably calling other neighbors to complain about his violations. She had no idea that she was living on his property, enforcing rules on land that belonged to him. Marcus, are you there? Monday morning brought chaos to Willowbrook Estates. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching the circus unfold across the street. A sleek black Mercedes had pulled into Karen's driveway at 7 a.m., disgorging a man in an expensive suit, who was now gesticulating wildly as Karen paced back and forth on her perfectly manicured lawn. Richard Blackstone, Esquire, according to the business card he'd thrust at Marcus an hour earlier. Karen's lawyer had arrived with all the swagger of a gunslinger, clearly expecting to intimidate some hapless homeowner into submission. Instead, he'd spent the last 60 minutes staring at Marcus's property deed with the expression of a man watching his billable hours evaporate. Marcus's phone buzzed with another text from a neighbor. Word was spreading through the community like wildfire, and not in the way Karen had planned. Is it true you own the whole neighborhood? This from Janet Willis, 3 houses down. She'd been one of Karen's victims last year, harassed over her garden gnome collection until she'd finally removed them in defeat. Is Karen really not the HOA president? From Mike Rodriguez, who'd been fined repeatedly for parking his work van in his own driveway. Can we finally paint our front door red? From the elderly Mrs. Patterson, who'd dreamed of a cheerful red door for 15 years but had been told it violated aesthetic standards. Marcus was crafting a response when he heard shouting from across the street. Through his window, he could see the lawyer's animated conversation with Karen had taken a decidedly unpleasant turn. Absolutely no legal standing whatsoever. Blackstone's voice carried across the morning air. The man owns the property. All of it. There is no HOA, there never was an HOA, and you've been operating under completely false pretenses for 15 years. That's impossible. Karen's voice was shrill with desperation. I have documentation. I have meeting minutes. I have enforcement records. You have fiction. Elaborate, expensive fiction that could land you in serious legal trouble. Marcus decided it was time to join the conversation. He walked across the street, deed in hand, and approached the 2 combatants. Good morning, Karen. Mr. Blackstone. The lawyer turned to him with the wary respect of a man who'd realized he was outgunned. Mr. Chen. I've been reviewing your property documents. And my client appears to have been operating under some significant misconceptions about her authority in this community. That's one way to put it, Marcus said mildly. Karen's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. This is all just a misunderstanding. Richard, surely there's something. There's nothing, Karen. Blackstone's voice was clipped and professional. Mr. Chen owns this property. All of it. The most you could possibly claim is some kind of adverse possession, but you'd need 20 years of continuous occupation under hostile and open conditions, and you've been paying property taxes on your individual lot, which negates any claim. What about the covenant? The community standards? What covenant? There's no recorded covenant because Harold Willowbrook never created one. You've been enforcing imaginary rules on property you don't own. Marcus almost felt sorry for Karen as the reality crashed down on her. Almost. There has to be something, she whispered. I've dedicated my life to this community. Karen, Marcus said gently, we need to talk. All of us. Why don't we go inside where we can discuss this privately? I'm not going anywhere with you. Karen snapped. Richard, what are my options? Blackstone was already packing his briefcase. Your options are to hope Mr. Chen doesn't decide to sue you for fraud, harassment, or any number of other potential claims. Karen, I'm terminating this representation effective immediately. I'd suggest you find a criminal defense attorney. Criminal? Karen's voice cracked. You've been collecting fines under false pretenses for 15 years. You've placed liens on properties you had no authority to encumber. You've threatened people with legal action you had no standing to take. At minimum, that's fraud. Depending on the amounts involved, it could be felony fraud. Blackstone walked to his car without another word, leaving Karen standing alone in her driveway, the carefully constructed world she'd built crumbling around her. Karen, Marcus said softly. We really do need to talk. For a moment, her mask slipped entirely and Marcus saw something unexpected, fear. Real, desperate fear. You're going to destroy everything, she whispered. No, Karen. I'm going to fix everything. But first, we need to understand exactly what you've done. An hour later, they sat in Marcus's living room. Karen had aged 10 years in the span of 60 minutes, her usual perfect composure replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone watching their life implode. How much money have you collected in fines over the years? Marcus asked. It's not about the money, Karen said automatically. It's about maintaining standards. How much, Karen? She was silent for a long moment. The HOA account has about $47,000. $47,000. Marcus stared at her. You've collected $47,000 in fines from people whose properties you don't own, using authority you don't have. It was for community improvements. The landscaping, the maintenance, what landscaping? What maintenance? Karen, you don't own any common property to maintain. Every dollar you collected was theft. That's not. I wasn't stealing. I was protecting property values. Whose property values? Mine. Because I'm the only one who actually owns any common property here. Karen's hands were shaking now. You don't understand. When I moved here 23 years ago, this place was perfect. Harold Willowbrook had created something special, a real community where people cared about quality, about standards. When he got sick, someone had to step up. Someone had to make sure it didn't all fall apart. So you appointed yourself. Someone had to. Do you know what neighborhoods look like when nobody's in charge? When people just do whatever they want? You mean when people are free to live their lives on their own property? It's not about freedom, it's about responsibility. To your neighbors, to your community, to the values that make a place worth living in. Marcus studied her face, seeing the genuine conviction beneath the desperation. Karen Henderson truly believed she'd been doing the right thing, protecting something precious from the chaos of individual freedom. Karen, tell me about the Martinez family. Her face hardened. They were destroying property values. How? They didn't fit. Their house was always full of people, loud music, children running around. They put up those religious displays, prayer flags in their backyard. It wasn't appropriate for the neighborhood aesthetic. The aesthetic you decided on. The aesthetic Harold Willowbrook established. Harold Willowbrook, who sold me a property with no covenants, no restrictions, and no HOA. Karen, did you ever actually meet Harold Willowbrook? She hesitated. Not exactly. He was very private by the time I moved here. So you decided what he would have wanted. I knew what he would have wanted. A quality community. People who understood what it meant to live in a place like this. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the full scope of what had happened. Karen hadn't just been enforcing imaginary rules, she'd been enforcing her own vision of what the neighborhood should be, using fabricated authority to drive out anyone who didn't match her ideal of the right kind of resident. Karen, I need you to understand something. You're going to return every penny you collected in fines. You're going to personally apologize to every family you drove out of this neighborhood. And you're going to stop enforcing any rules whatsoever, because you have no authority to enforce anything. And if you refuse, then I'll have you arrested for fraud, and I'll sue you for damages on behalf of every family you victimized. The Martina's family alone lost their life savings because of your harassment. How do you think a jury's going to react when they hear about your campaign to keep the neighborhood looking the way you think it should look? Karen's face went white. You can't prove anything. Karen, you documented everything yourself. You posted the meeting minutes online. You kept detailed records of every fine, every violation, every family you targeted. You created a perfect paper trail of 15 years of systematic harassment. It wasn't harassment. It was community standards. Standards you made up. Rules you had no authority to create. Property you don't own. Marcus leaned forward. Karen, it's over. The question now is whether we handle this quietly or whether I call the police and let them sort it out. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Marcus could see Karen's mind racing, calculating options, looking for an escape that didn't exist. What do you want? She finally whispered. I want you to fix what you broke. I want the money returned. I want the families you victimized to get justice. And I want you to understand that your reign of terror is over. And then we start over. We build a real community, one where people are free to live their lives without fear of harassment from self-appointed dictators. Karen stood up abruptly, her composure cracking completely. You think you're so noble, don't you? You think you're some kind of savior. But you have no idea what you're destroying. This was a good place before you came here. It was safe, it was clean, it was the kind of place where good people could raise their families. It was the kind of place where you could control other people's lives. It was the kind Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything seem possible. Marcus Chen stood in his kitchen, sipping coffee and watching Karen Henderson through his window as she performed her weekly ritual of measuring her neighbor's grass height with a ruler. The irony wasn't lost on him, she was trespassing on his property to enforce rules she had no authority to create. The property deed lay spread across his dining table like a battle plan. He'd spent the evening reading every word, every clause, every addendum. The truth was staggering in its simplicity. Harold Willowbrook had been a lonely old man with no heirs, and when he died, his estate had quietly sold the entire development to the first qualified buyer. That buyer happened to be Marcus Chen, a divorced software engineer looking for a fresh start. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter Emma. Can't wait to see your new place next weekend, Dad. Is there really a pool? Marcus smiled, looking out at the community pool that was, technically, his pool. Everything was his: the tennis courts where Karen played every Tuesday, the community garden where the neighbors grew their prize-winning roses, even the HOA building where Karen held her monthly tribunals. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. Marcus had learned long ago that knowledge was power, and he intended to be thoroughly prepared for what came next. He pulled out his laptop and began researching Karen Henderson. Social media was a goldmine of information for someone who clearly loved being the center of attention. Her Facebook page was a masterpiece of self-aggrandizement, photos of her at city council meetings, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and what appeared to be every HOA conference in the tri-state area. The deeper he dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Karen had been HOA president for 15 years, running unopposed in elections that she herself organized. Her campaign promises always involved maintaining standards and protecting property values. But the comments on her posts told a different story. Thanks for handling the Martinez situation, read one comment from 2 years ago. I'm so glad. We don't have to worry about that kind of element anymore. Marcus found the Martinez family's story in the HOA meeting minutes, which Karen had helpfully posted online. The family had been fined repeatedly for violations that seemed increasingly petty: a basketball hoop that was too visible from the street, holiday decorations that were culturally inappropriate, and ultimately, a manufactured violation about their fence height that had resulted in a lien on their property. The Martinezes had been forced to sell. Marcus scrolled through more minutes, finding a pattern that made his stomach turn. The Johnsons, fined for excessive noise after their teenage son practiced saxophone in the afternoon. The Patels, cited for unauthorized cultural displays after hanging prayer flags in their private backyard. The Washingtons, driven out over A supposed violation of the architectural consistency rules after they painted their shutters navy blue instead of forest green. All of them had been people of color. All of them had been forced to sell their homes. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the full scope of Karen's operation becoming clear. She wasn't just a petty tyrant, she was a systematic racist using HOA rules as a weapon to maintain what she saw as the right kind of neighborhood. And she'd been doing it for 15 years with no one to stop her. His phone rang. Lisa Martinez. Marcus, I hope I'm not calling too early. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Actually, I'm glad you called. I've been doing some research on Karen Henderson. Lisa, I think there's something you need to know. What kind of something? Marcus told her about the pattern he'd discovered, the systematic targeting of minority families, the manufactured violations. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Marcus, I need to tell you something. I'm not just your real estate agent. I'm also Elena Martinez's daughter. Elena Martinez. The family that was forced out 2 years ago. Karen Henderson destroyed my parents' lives. They lost their home, their savings, everything. My father had a heart attack from the stress. He's okay now, but... Her voice trailed off. Lisa, why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was hoping you'd be different. I was hoping you'd be someone who could stand up to her. And now, finding out that you own the whole place. She paused. Marcus, you have the power to stop her. You have the power to fix this. I know. But I need to be smart about it. Karen Henderson didn't build this little empire by being stupid. She's going to fight back. She's also going to underestimate you. She always does. Marcus was about to respond when he heard a commotion outside. Through his window, he could see Karen marching down the street with a clipboard, flanked by 2 other women he recognized as her lieutenants, Beverly Mills and Sandra Weatherby. They were heading straight for his house. Lisa, I have to go. Karen's coming with reinforcements. Marcus, be careful. When cornered, she gets nasty. Thanks for the warning. Marcus hung up and walked outside to meet them. Karen was dressed in what appeared to be her battle uniform, a crisp white blazer over dark slacks, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Beverly and Sandra flanked her like bodyguards, their faces set in identical expressions of disapproval. Mr. Chen, Karen announced, her voice carrying across the morning air. I'm here to conduct a formal inspection of your property. As you failed to comply with yesterday's violations, we're moving to the next phase of enforcement. Good morning to you too, Karen. Ladies. Marcus nodded to Beverly and Sandra, who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. And what exactly does this inspection involve? A complete documentation of all violations for presentation to the HOA board, Karen said, pulling out a digital camera. We'll be measuring setbacks, documenting unauthorized modifications, and assessing compliance with community standards. I see. And you have the authority to do this. As HOA president, I have the authority to ensure all residents comply with our community standards. Now, if you'll step aside, we need to access your backyard. Marcus didn't move. Actually, Karen, I think we need to have a conversation first. There's nothing to discuss. You're in violation, Mr. Chen. Multiple violations. And if you don't comply immediately, we'll be forced to place a lien on your property. A lien? Marcus couldn't help but smile. That's interesting. Tell me, Karen. What gives you the authority to place a lien on my property? The HOA covenant, of course. Every homeowner signed it when they purchased their property. I see. And where exactly is this covenant recorded? Karen's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a direct question. Where is the HOA covenant recorded, and what gives you the legal authority to enforce it? Beverly and Sandra exchanged glances. This wasn't going the way Karen had promised them it would. Mr. Chen, you're stalling. Either comply with our standards or face the consequences. Actually, Karen, I think you're the one who needs to worry about consequences. Marcus pulled out the property deed, unfolding it carefully. You see, I spent yesterday evening reading some very interesting documents. Legal documents. And I discovered something fascinating. I don't have time for games, Mr. Chen. This isn't a game. This is about property rights. Tell me, Karen, what do you know about the original development of Willowbrook Estates? Harold. Willowbrook developed this community in 1982. He established the HOA to maintain property values and community standards. That's partially correct. Harold Willowbrook did develop this community. But he never actually turned it over to an HOA. He retained ownership of all common areas, all recreational facilities, and all community infrastructure until his death last year. Karen's face had gone pale. That's impossible. Is it? When Harold died, his estate sold everything to a single buyer. Everything, Karen. The entire development, including all the land your house sits on, all the common areas you claim to manage, even the building where you hold your little HOA meetings. You're lying. Am I? Marcus held up the deed. Would you like to see the official county records? Because I own Willowbrook Estates, Karen. All of it. Every square foot. Which means you've been living on my property, using my facilities, and terrorizing my tenants for 15 years. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Beverly and Sandra were staring at Karen with growing alarm, while Karen herself seemed to be processing the implications. That's not possible, she whispered. It's not only possible, it's legal fact. Which means, Karen, that you have no authority to fine anyone, no authority to place liens, and no authority to enforce any rules whatsoever. You're just a tenant who's been harassing the other tenants. You can't just. Karen's composure was cracking like ice in the sun. Actually, I can. And I will. You see, Karen, I've been doing my homework. I know about the Martinezes. I know about the Johnsons, the Patels, the Washingtons. I know about your little campaign to keep this neighborhood looking the way you think it should look. You don't understand. This is a quality community. We have standards, no, Karen. You have prejudices. And you've been using fake authority to enforce them. But that ends now. Karen's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You can't do this. I've invested 15 years in this community. I've given my life to maintaining property values. You've given. Marcus Chen had always believed that truth was a weapon more powerful than any lie. But as he sat in his kitchen Saturday morning, watching Karen Henderson's house through his window while carefully maintaining the court-mandated 500-foot distance, he was beginning to understand that truth without strategy was just noise. The past 3 days had been a masterclass in psychological warfare. Anonymous complaints had been filed against him with the city, noise violations for his excessive classical music, zoning complaints about his truck, even a report claiming he was running an unlicensed business from his garage. Each complaint was baseless, but each required time, energy, and documentation to refute. Meanwhile, Karen had transformed herself into the neighborhood's wounded martyr. She'd given an interview to the local newspaper about being terrorized by a vindictive new resident, carefully omitting any mention of her fraudulent HOA operation. The article portrayed her as a dedicated community volunteer being victimized by a bitter outsider who couldn't accept reasonable community standards. It was brilliant, really. Karen had weaponized her own downfall, using the natural anger of her victims to create a narrative where she was the one under attack. The restraining order made it impossible for Marcus to directly confront her lies, while her constant stream of false complaints kept him on the defensive. But Marcus hadn't spent 20 years in software development without learning a few things about systems thinking and strategic patience. If Karen wanted to play the long game, he was more than willing to oblige. His doorbell rang at exactly 10 a.m. Through the peephole, he saw a familiar face, Detective Morrison, but this time she wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit stood beside her, along with someone Marcus recognized as Agent Lisa Delacroix from the FBI White-Collar Crime Division. Marcus opened the door, his mind racing. Detective Morrison. This is unexpected. Mr. Chen. We need to talk. This is Assistant District Attorney James Walsh and Agent Delacroix. May we come in? They settled in his living room, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken tensions. Morrison spoke first. Mr. Chen, we've completed our investigation into the vandalism at Ms. Henderson's property. And we've determined that you had no involvement in the incident. Your alibi checked out, and we found no evidence connecting you to the vandalism. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and wariness. I appreciate that, Detective. But I suspect that's not why you're here. ADA Walsh leaned forward. Mr. Chen, Agent Delacroix has been investigating financial irregularities in several homeowners associations across the state. When we learned about the situation here in Willowbrook Estates, it raised some red flags. Agent Delacroix opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mr. Chen would like your permission to examine the financial records of the so-called Willowbrook Estates HOA. Specifically, we are interested in the bank accounts Ms. Henderson has been operating. Of course. But may I ask what this is really about? It's about a pattern, Delacroix said. Karen Henderson isn't just a local HOA president who overstepped her bounds. She's part of a network of individuals who've been using fake HOA structures to commit large-scale fraud across multiple communities. Marcus stared at her. A network. We've identified at least 12 similar operations in 3 states. The pattern is always the same: someone moves into a community with unclear or non-existent HOA structures, establishes themselves as the authority figure, then systematically collects fees and fines from residents who don't know any better. But how is that possible? Don't people verify these things? You'd be surprised how many people assume that if someone has official-looking documents and speaks with authority, they must be legitimate. Especially in communities where the original developer is deceased or absent. Walsh took over. Mr. Chen, we believe Karen Henderson has been running similar operations in at least 3 other communities over the past 20 years. She establishes herself, collects money for several years, then moves on before anyone catches on. Willowbrook Estates was supposed to be her retirement score, the big final payday. But she's lived here for 23 years. Has she? Delacroix pulled out another document. We've been digging into Ms. Henderson's background. The woman you know as Karen Henderson purchased that house 15 years ago using proceeds from the sale of a property in Michigan where she'd been running a similar operation. Marcus felt the pieces clicking into place. So the real Karen Henderson died in 2009 in Florida. Our Karen assumed her identity when she moved here. Her real name is Cheryl Adamson, and she's been running variations of this scam for over 2 decades. The implications hit Marcus like a freight train. The restraining order is based on perjured testimony from someone operating under a false identity, Walsh said grimly. Mr. Chen, we need your help to build a case against her. But more importantly, we need to move fast. Our sources suggest she's preparing to disappear. What kind of sources? Detective Morrison spoke up. Beverly Mills came to us yesterday. She's been Cheryl's assistant for years, and she's been keeping detailed records of everything. Financial transactions, enforcement patterns, even recordings of some conversations. Beverly has recordings. Karen insisted on recording all official HOA business for the minutes. Beverly kept copies. Mr. Chen, we have 15 years of audio evidence of this woman systematically targeting minority families, collecting fraudulent fees, and operating under false pretenses. Agent Delacroix leaned forward. But here's the problem. Beverly also told us that Karen has been liquidating assets all week. She's converted the HOA account to cryptocurrency, sold her car, and put her house on the market with a cash-only, quick-close requirement. She's running, Walsh confirmed. And if she gets away, she'll just set up somewhere else and start over. Mr. Chen, we need to move on this immediately. What do you need me to do? We need you to help us catch her in the act, Morrison said. We want to set up a controlled confrontation where she admits to her activities on the record. How? I have a restraining order against me, which was obtained through perjury by someone operating under a false identity, Walsh said. Mr. Chen, that restraining order is void. But Karen doesn't know we know that yet. Marcus was beginning to understand their plan. You want me to violate the restraining order? We want you to appear to violate it while wearing a wire in circumstances where she feels safe enough to tell you exactly what she thinks of you and your investigation. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It is, Delacroix admitted. Cheryl Adamson is a career criminal who's facing federal fraud charges and potentially decades in prison. She's desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. But, Morrison added, it's also our best chance to get her confession on record and prevent her from victimizing any more communities. Marcus looked out his window at Karen's house, where he could see her loading boxes into a rental truck. She really was preparing to run. When do we do this? Tonight, Walsh said. According to Beverly, Karen. Cheryl is planning to leave tomorrow morning. She's scheduled a final HOA board meeting for this evening to officially dissolve the association and transfer any remaining funds to herself. A board meeting with what board? Exactly. It's a pure fabrication designed to create legal cover for her theft of the remaining funds. But she's invited several neighbors, including some of her former victims. She wants to give one final performance as the martyred community leader driven out by vindictive residents. Marcus felt a grim smile tugging at his lips. And that's when you want me to crash the party. With a wire, with backup, and with a very specific script designed to get her to incriminate herself, Delacroix confirmed. Mr. Chen, are you willing to do this? Marcus thought about Elena Martinez losing her home, about the families driven away by Karen's systematic harassment, about the nearly $80,000 stolen from people who could least afford it. He thought about his daughter Emma, who would visit next weekend and deserved to see a community built on justice rather than fear. I'm in, he said. But I have one condition. What's that? When this is over, when she's arrested and the money is recovered, I want to personally deliver refund checks to every family she victimized. They deserve to know that justice was done. Agent Delacroix smiled. Mr. Chen, I think we can arrange that. As the law enforcement team left to prepare for the evening's operation, Marcus stood alone in his kitchen, looking out at the community he now owned, truly owned, not through fraud or deception, but through legal deed and honest purchase. Tonight, Karen Henderson's 15-year reign of terror would finally end. But more than that, tonight would mark the beginning of something new, a community where people could live without fear, where diversity was celebrated rather than attacked. Where the only standards that mattered were kindness, respect, and common human decency. Karen Henderson had built her empire on lies and hatred. Marcus Chen was about to replace it with something far more powerful, truth, justice, and the simple radical notion that everyone deserved to feel safe in their own home. The final battle was about to begin, and for the first time since this nightmare started, Marcus was certain about how it would end. Justice would prevail. It had to. 3 days passed in deceptive calm. Marcus spent them fielding calls from neighbors, answering questions, and slowly piecing together the full scope of Karen's 15-year operation. What he discovered was worse than he'd imagined. The HOA bank account contained more than $47,000, it held nearly $80,000. Karen had been creative in her revenue streams, charging administrative fees for pool access, maintenance assessments for landscaping that was never done, and architectural review fees for modifications that required no approval. She'd even charged families for violation hearings where she played judge, jury, and executioner, but it was the pattern of enforcement that truly sickened him. Marcus had obtained copies of every violation notice from Karen's meticulous files. And the picture they painted was crystal clear. White families received warnings. Minority families received fines. White families got second chances. Minority families got liens. The Yamamoto family had been fined for excessive garden ornamentation after installing a traditional stone lantern. The Okonkwo family faced architectural inconsistency charges for painting their trim a shade of blue that was, according to Karen's notes, too vibrant for community standards. The list went on, a methodical campaign of harassment disguised as municipal authority. Marcus was reviewing these files when his doorbell rang Wednesday evening. Through the peephole, he saw a woman he didn't recognize, mid-40s, professional attire, carrying a briefcase. "Mr. Chen. I'm Detective Sarah Morrison with the County Prosecutor's Office. I'd like to speak with you about Karen Henderson." Marcus opened the door, his stomach tightening. "Is everything all right?" "That depends. May I come in?" They sat in his living room, the detective's sharp eyes taking in every detail. "Mr. Chen, we've received some concerning information about Ms. Henderson's activities in this neighborhood. I understand you recently discovered some irregularities with the Homeowners Association." "That's one way to put it." "Detective, there is no Homeowners Association. There never was. Karen Henderson has been operating a fraud for 15 years. So I've been told." "Mr. Chen, we need to discuss what happened yesterday morning." Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. "Yesterday morning. According to several witnesses, you had a confrontation with Ms. Henderson in your driveway. Raised voices, accusations of fraud, threats of legal action. She was trying to conduct a fake inspection of my property. I informed her that she had no authority to do so. And then her lawyer told her she was facing potential criminal charges and left." Detective Morrison consulted her notes. "Mr. Chen, where were you yesterday evening between 6 and 10 p.m. "Here. At home." "Why? Can anyone verify that?" "I was on a video call with my daughter from 7 to 8:30. She lives in California with my ex-wife." "Detective, what's this about?" Morrison leaned forward. "Yesterday evening, someone vandalized Karen Henderson's property. Spray-painted messages on her garage door, smashed her car windows, left threatening notes in her mailbox." Marcus stared at her. "And you think I did this?" "Ms. Henderson believes you orchestrated it. She says you've been inciting other residents against her, encouraging them to take revenge for her legitimate enforcement of community standards." "Detective, Karen Henderson doesn't have any legitimate authority. She's been running a con game for 15 years. I have the property deeds to prove it." "I've seen the deeds, Mr. Chen. That's not what we are here to discuss. What we are discussing is whether you used your discovery of Ms. Henderson's situation to encourage harassment or violence against her." "I would never do that. I specifically told neighbors we needed to handle this legally and peacefully." "But you did inform other residents about Ms. Henderson's lack of authority." "Of course I did. They had a right to know they'd been defrauded." Morrison made a note. "Mr. Chen, I need you to understand something. Regardless of Ms. Henderson's legal authority or lack thereof, she's still entitled to protection from harassment and intimidation. Vigilante justice isn't justice at all." "I completely agree. Detective, I'm a software engineer, not a vigilante. I want to resolve this through proper legal channels." "Good. Because Ms. Henderson has hired private security for her home, and she's considering filing for a restraining order against several residents, including you." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. "A restraining order? On what grounds?" "Harassment, intimidation, inciting others to violence against her." "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you directly, did you encourage anyone to take action against Karen Henderson beyond legal remedies?" "Absolutely not. Because if you used your position as the actual property owner to organize any kind of retaliation against Ms. Henderson, that would be a serious crime. Property ownership doesn't give you the right to orchestrate harassment campaigns." "Detective, I think you're missing the bigger picture here. Karen Henderson systematically targeted minority families for harassment. She collected nearly $80,000 in fraudulent fines. She destroyed lives and drove families from their homes. And now you're investigating me because someone spray-painted her garage." Morrison's expression didn't change. "Mr. Chen, I'm investigating a crime that occurred yesterday. Ms. Henderson's past actions, whatever they were, don't justify vigilante retaliation." "What exactly was spray-painted on her garage?" Morrison consulted her notes. Racist fraud. Pay back what you stole. We know what you did. And some language I won't repeat. And you think I'm responsible for this? I think you discovered information that seriously damaged Ms. Henderson's reputation, and I think you shared that information with people who might have strong emotional reactions to it. Whether you intended for that to lead to vandalism is what I'm trying to determine. Marcus realized he was in a trap. By exposing Karen's fraud, by showing neighbors the evidence of her systematic harassment, he'd inadvertently created a situation where someone had taken matters into their own hands. And now Karen was using that retaliation to paint herself as the victim. Detective, may I ask who reported this vandalism? Ms. Henderson called it in herself around 10 p.m. yesterday. And you were the witnesses to our supposed confrontation. Beverly Mills and Sandra Weatherby. Of course. Karen's former lieutenants, probably trying to distance themselves from their complicity in her operation by cooperating with whatever narrative she was spinning. Detective Morrison, I think Karen Henderson is trying to deflect attention from her own crimes by making herself appear to be the victim of mine. I never encouraged anyone to vandalize her property, but I also can't control how people react when they discover they've been systematically defrauded for 15 years. Mr. Chen, let me be very clear about something. Ms. Henderson may have acted improperly in her role as HOA president, but that doesn't strip her of her rights as a citizen. If I find evidence that you organized or encouraged retaliation against her, I will charge you accordingly. And if I find evidence that she's making false accusations to avoid prosecution for fraud. Morrison stood up. Then you provide that evidence to the proper authorities and let them handle it. You don't take matters into your own hands. She handed him a business card. Mr. Chen, stay away from Karen Henderson. Don't contact her, don't approach her property, don't discuss her with other residents. Consider this an informal warning. After the detective left, Marcus sat alone in his living room, trying to process what had just happened. Karen Henderson had somehow managed to flip the script, transforming herself from perpetrator to victim in the space of 3 days. It was masterful, really. Use the natural anger of her victims against them, then play the helpless woman being terrorized by vengeful neighbors. His phone rang. Lisa Martinez. Marcus, I just heard about the vandalism. Please tell me you had nothing to do with it. Of course not. But the police seem to think I orchestrated it. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Karen Henderson doesn't go down without a fight. She's done this before. What do you mean? When my parents fought their fines, when they tried to expose what she was doing, suddenly there were complaints about them to the city, noise violations, zoning complaints, reports of a suspicious activity at their house. Karen knows how to weaponize the system, Marcus. She's been doing it for 15 years. So what are you saying? I'm saying be very, very careful. Karen Henderson is cornered now, and cornered animals are dangerous. She's going to do whatever it takes to survive this, even if it means destroying you in the process. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's doorbell rang again. This time, he saw a uniformed police officer through the peephole. Mr. Chen. I have a restraining order to serve you. Marcus opened the door with a growing sense of unreality. The officer handed him an official document bearing the seal of the county court. You're hereby ordered to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from Karen Henderson and her property. No contact, direct or indirect. Violation of this order is a criminal offense. Marcus scanned the document, his anger building with each line. Karen had sworn under oath that he'd made direct threats against her safety, that he'd organized neighborhood harassment campaigns, and that she feared for her life due to his escalating pattern of intimidation. Every word was a lie. But it was a lie told under oath in an official document that now had the force